So my name is Seth, and I'm the product marketing manager at Accellion. If you're not familiar with Accellion, we actually provide mobile file sharing solutions. And so what we're going to talk about is best practices for enabling mobile workforce. So one of the things I'd like to do is kick things off and really talk about the proliferation of mobile technology. And so, what we're really finding is that there's a vast majority of users, both in public and private sector, utilizing mobile devices today. And of course that's going to continue to increase. And people are wanting to use mobile to increase productivity, to increase communication. And that's, it's proliferating regardless of where, folks are. And so, what we're finding is that there is a continued need for mobile technologies, regardless of whether we're talking about public sector, private sector, or a combination of both. And so with that proliferation of mobile, one of the questions that we get asked, and one of the questions, is how mobile ready is the organization? And so, surveys have come out, there's some good news and there's some bad news. People are finding that, 60%, almost 60% of surveyed folks said that their agency wasn't compliant. They didn't feel that they were ready to implement BYOD programs. And so, this is, there's also good news in that 35% of agencies have matured their strategy in the last year. And so, what we're finding, regardless of who we're working with, is that people are slowly starting to recognize that they need policies, that they need procedures, that they need to look at. And so, the reason for this is, why, agencies ready, why is it important? And, what we found is that, the vast majority of folks who are using mobile technologies are saying that it's increasing productivity, it's increasing collaboration, communication, constituent responsiveness, particularly in the public sector. And so, it becomes very imperative to have that mobile practice. And so, we have typical inquiries. We're working with a lot of state and local agencies, federal government as well, and we get asked a lot of questions. We get asked, how do we achieve secure BYOD? How can we have the tools necessary to support that mobile workforce? How do we meet those collaboration and requirements? I need to be able to work with vendors and contractors and folks that are outside of the organization. The one that comes up quite a bit is, how do we, can I work with a solution that's on premise? I don't want to use the cloud. That comes up quite a bit, particularly for folks who are dealing with, personal identifiable information. It could be social security numbers. It could be any sort of data that you really don't want to have in the public cloud, and we get asked that question quite a bit. We get asked questions about mobile security, and so, we do get a lot of inquiries in regards to what's important for state and local government. And so, of course, one of the biggest challenges, regardless of whether you're talking about public sector or private sector, is, in the last couple of years, we've had the consumerization of IT. Everyone's bringing their mobile phone to work. People are using consumer apps as well as business apps for everything. And so, we all know that certain, applications, Dropbox, Evernote, those are public cloud solutions. They may or may not have the security that different organizations are going to require. And of course, that's leading to this concept or this idea of unmanaged file sharing. I'm using Dropbox to share content with my colleagues because I don't have another alternative, and sending files through email isn't going to work because the file is really large. We get that a lot. Of course, Outlook has different limitations, and so, those are the things that really come up in terms of, what the challenge is today, and we find this across different sectors. And so, we've talked a little bit about, what's the importance of
mobility and how many folks are actually using mobile. And so I want to spend a little bit of time about who should be concerned about mobile data leakage, talk about the common sources of leakage, and then talk about best practices, how you can mitigate that so that you can enable secure BYOD within the organization. So, who should be concerned? I bring up this stat again because it is pretty, it's pretty relevant, right? I mean, if you've got, this is public sector folks, if you have 17% who can actually work from home, that means they need, secure access to content at their home. And then, 4 in 10 are using mobile for work-related tasks. I do that as well. I've got my iPhone, but I have my work email, I've got my personal email, I'm accessing content, and so I need to be able to do that securely as much as that needs to be done in the public sector as well. And so, let's take a look at, what's the level of concern? We find that nearly 70% of organizations are extremely concerned with current practices for mobility. There's a lot of concern that folks are using mobile, but it's not being used securely, that data might leak, but a lot of organizations aren't sure how to get a handle on it. It's one of those things that have sort of crept in. A few folks started bringing their iPhones and Android devices into work, and suddenly, you have an entire organization doing that because it makes it easier to get the job done. Everyone has things to do, and you basically want to have that flexibility. And so let's talk about some of the common ways that data can leak from the mobile device. And some of these might be familiar, some of them not. One of the things with mobile is that folks are really using a lot of public cloud file sharing solutions, and of course this is because on your tablet, on your phone, you don't have the ability to have a USB port, you don't have an SD card, you can't easily just share content, and so folks decided early on, most people were pretty astute and said, okay, I'm going to add my Dropbox app on my iPhone, and that's how I can take content from my laptop into my mobile, and that's how I can share content either amongst my own devices or with others. Of course, the problem is that the security capabilities on those are almost none, right? The other thing that's common source of data leakage, data loss, is lost and stolen devices. I mean, it's very easy to misplace your iPhone. I mean, how many of us can't even find it at home, right? I mean, you lose that phone, you're calling that phone from something else so you can find it. I mean, it becomes very easy. That's another common source. The other source is, not having PIN protection. So if you have a mobile device, you want to, and you're saving files for offline use, you want to have PIN-based access so people can't just easily swipe the phone and get access to that content. The other is not having passwords. The recent survey from Mobile Work Exchange actually said that 25% of users do not even have a password on their phone. And a third of those actually have very easy to crack passwords. And so, those are some basic things that at least are going to allow you to protect the content on that phone. Because, at the end of the day, if you're supporting BYOD, the employee owns the phone, but you're going to own that content, and you want to make sure that that content is secure regardless of where that employee is. Having encryption at this point is table stakes. You need to have encryption as content is saved on the device, encryption at rest, in transit. Those are table stakes at this point. The use of unapproved apps. We talked a little bit about Dropbox earlier, but how many of us on our phone, you want to open a file and you have a menu of 10 different applications that you can open files in, and those may or may not be sanctioned by IT. One of the things that is good is to actually whitelist, blacklist applications so employees can easily know which apps they can open files in, and it makes it a lot easier. There are no questions. If the file can't be opened in 10 other apps, then employees know what they can actually use. Use of public Wi-Fi, it's a risk. You don't want to be opening proprietary information on public Wi-Fi someone else can access. And of course, another source of leakage is really not having oversight, right? I mean, you need to have audit trails, you need to have some sort of reporting so folks know, IT knows who's sharing with whom, what's going on, and everything needs to be auditable. And that's really the key, is that if you don't, if you're using a consumer solution, that's not going to be the case. The employee is going to know who they've shared content with, but the organization isn't. And if there is a breach, you want to be able to trace that back to a particular individual and know, whether they on a laptop, were they on their mobile device, when did it occur, and so that's another thing that you need to look at. So let's talk about best practices. What can we do to mitigate the risk? How do we enable that mobile workforce so that folks can be productive wherever they need to be? And so, of course, regardless of whether you're talking public sector, private sector, people are on the road, they're in the field, folks are not always at their desk when they're doing their job. And of course, you need to be able to make sure that people can do that, but the content is secure. So we've distilled this down into 4 best practices. The first is having a private cloud deployment, and we'll go into that. The second is having a series of mobile security controls, and I'll show you a list of controls, but these are things that are options that you can implement. I mean, it's certainly not exclusive. You don't need to have all of them. It really depends on what you need for the organization. The third is having mobile productivity tools, and I'll share with you why that's particularly important. And the last is having integration with ECMs, because I'm sure most of you have some sort of ECM in the organization where you have a SharePoint or a file share system, and you need to have a seamless access to that as well. So if we look at private cloud deployment, there are multiple deployment options that are available out there today. You have public cloud, you have private cloud, you have the hybrid, hosted. And so the key really is to ensure that you have a solution that allows you to control access to content. And having that control really makes a difference, because if you're using a public cloud solution, then you're going to rely on them for those security policies and those security procedures. Whereas, the key is really making sure that that content's under your control. You're not using third-party services, and it allows you to actually comply with specific regulations, because not all other vendors are going to do that. The second best practice is really having mobile security controls, and that means that when you are implementing a BYOD program for your organization, that you ensure that you have the security policies that are necessary to ensure that that content that your agency owns is protected. We talked a little bit about whitelisting apps. You need to make sure that you can control which apps can open files, right? Having remote wipe. One of the things that we find from a lot of our clients is that people want remote wipe. They want to be able to take that content that's in the mobile container and wipe that when an employee leaves or a device is lost or stolen. Talking about, we talked about activity logs. You really want to have a full audit trail. You know what's going on. If someone leaves an organization and somehow they still have access to files, you want to know what they accessed post-departure. That's an example right there. Having a mobile secure container is really important, and what that allows you to do is basically make sure that whatever content is saved on the device is actually secured. It allows you to separate, agency content from an individual's personal content, and that way, if an individual leaves an organization, the device is lost or stolen, as I mentioned, you can actually take that content away. You can remotely wipe just that content and not touch the individual's personal information. We talked a little bit about encryption, but I mean, that is really table stakes at this point. You need to have encryption at rest. You need to have encryption and transit, integration with LDAP, single sign-on. Make it as easy for your users to access content and have one set of username and passwords. The good thing is that there are actually quite a few agencies that are implementing mobile security encryption, Quite a few are using MDM solutions, remote wipe, and multi-factor authentication. So these things are being implemented, but the more security policies that you have, the easier it is to control what is happening on an individual's mobile device. I mean, and it's not a question of locking down everything. It's just making sure that people have the proper policies and procedures so that they can do their job effectively while you're, of course, ensuring that data security. Because at the end of the day, that's the most important thing, is making sure that that data is secure. Because, unless you're providing the mobile phone, the employee has the phone, they own the phone, and you just need to make sure that whatever content is saved on that device, you can control. The third best practice is having integrated mobile productivity tools. And the reason why I bring this up is that, most of us are now not just accessing, email on our mobile device. We're sitting there with our iPad or Android tablet, and we're opening up Word documents, PowerPoints, working on spreadsheets on the go. I mean, you could be at a show like today, you could be somewhere else, and you need to work on a document. And having an integrated productivity tool means that you're not opening that document into a third-party solution, right? And it goes back to controlling how that content is being consumed. And so if it's within an integrated mobile app, then the employee doesn't have to use a third-party application, which you may or may not sanction. And so that's, from a security standpoint, that's another thing that's very important. The fourth best practice is really having a solution that allows you to integrate with your existing ECM so that you're not utilizing multiple applications to access content. Not having to deal with VPN is important. And so you really want to have a solution, you want to have a best practice that, one application is going to allow you to do everything that you need. We have a couple considerations for a secure BYOD deployment. First, figure out what you need. Look at analyst reports, look at success stories, see how others are actually implementing BYOD programs. There is a lot of best practices out there. There are a lot of folks that have done this in the last 2 to 3 years. So they are, look at how other people are doing this, see how they've been successful or unsuccessful, and then you can make tweaks for your group. The other thing is look at your risk tolerance. Not every solution is going to provide everything you need. And everyone needs to look at what their risk tolerance is. There might be some folks that are fine with employees using a consumer app, whereas others may say, look, everything I have is completely proprietary and I need a extremely robust solution. Make sure that your employees have a vested interest in the program. Make sure that they're part of that discussion when you're building policies. That's another way. You can create policies, but you really do need to have buy-in. We found that if you have buy-in, regardless of what it is you do, then you're going to get a lot more folks that are interested in complying with those policies. And, one of the other things is really train employees, talk about best practices. That's something that really needs to start from day one when you start implement policies, is really looking at how do we get buy-in, how do we make sure that everyone feels like they have ownership of protecting that data. It's not someone else's problem, but it's every individual who's accessing content. So one of the things that we do at Accellion is provide a mobile file sharing solution, and it's really built on 3 pillars. First is a mobile-first experience, and so one of the things that we've done is really look at how do we implement and how do we create mobile productivity across organizations, both in the public sector and private sector. And so one of the things you'll find with our solution is that regardless of whether you're on your mobile app or your laptop, desktop, it's the same user experience. And so that's not always the case these days. Lots of times what you find on a mobile device will be completely divorced from what users can see on their laptop. The other thing that we have here is seamless access to enterprise content. And this is particularly important, again, if you have content stored in multiple sources. We constantly hear about people having data in silos, and it's not easy to use, it's not easy to consume. it's not easy to find. And so one of the things that we allow you to do with a single mobile app is store content in our solution, but you can access that content securely from any of the ECMs that you may have. And we support a lot of the popular ECMs. And so, that's the second pillar. The third pillar is really having that private cloud three-tier architecture. One of the things that we've done here is create a scalable solution. That three-tier architecture means that you have your web, storage, and application tiers that can be put together or separated out. You can actually have your web tier in the DMZ and your storage and application tier behind the firewall. You can configure this as many ways as you want. You can scale it independently or all together. And so, it's a flexible architecture that goes with the system. We've been around for quite a number of years. We actually started in 1999. We're a global company. And we are, we do work with a lot of private sector as well as public sector. And so it's a lot, I use Verizon as an example because they're the largest deployment. And so that gives you an idea that, we work with folks with 500 users, 1,000 users, and obviously extremely large deployments as well. And so, we're actually headquartered in the Bay Area in Palo Alto. If you would like more information on what we can provide, or you want some more information on how you can build best practices, please come visit us. And if you have any questions, let me know. Any questions on best practices or anything we talked about? Well, thank you.